Hi, listeners. Welcome to It's the People, an interview series where we explore the inside story of building companies and investment portfolios, speaking with high-octane founders, limited partners, and fund managers. We hope these conversations push you to be even better at what you do. This week, my partner Randy Brandoff and I, Andy Greenfield, had the opportunity to interview a fascinating entrepreneur, Dan Pantelo, who is the CEO of Marpipe, which is a tool that lets marketers understand which parts of their creative contribute most to performance, and as a result, enable them to create the most compelling and effective advertising. We discussed a range of topics, including, is the future already here, with just a few people living in it already? We discussed why customers don't want others to know that they're already using Marpipe. And we discussed the difference between building a managed service business and a software as a service business. And one more thought, Dan talks about a world where creatives are now scientists. To start things off, Dan begins a conversation with his life story in 60 seconds. But before we begin, I want to note that this interview is for informational purposes only, and that the opinions expressed here should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. TIA Ventures is a seed stage fund focusing primarily on early stage B2B technology companies, with an obsessive focus on end customers and early teams.
So Dan, we're going to begin with learning more about Dan Pantelo, the person, and then we'll dig into your business. For starters, would you please share the 60-second version of your life story?
Yeah. So my parents are refugees from Soviet Ukraine. They were Jewish refugees. Flew over here when they were 19 and 20 years old. My mom and dad, and pregnant with me, landed, and I was born a few months after that. So made in the USSR, but born here. And then ever since, so we grew up poor in Brooklyn. And we were raised, essentially I was an only child, being raised by a family that escaped communism and wanted to pursue the American dream. Ever since growing up, I was always told about how the beauty of this country is that the amount of effort and work that you put in translates into benefits in your life, which is very different than the environment that my parents actually grew up in. No amount of effort or work you did back then actually benefited you. And so I had this message constantly hammered into my head. And so as a first generation, that's the first American in my family, first person to graduate college, I was also very entrepreneurial because of that kind of energy that my parents always instilled in me. I was writing essays. I had an essay writing business in high school, which I wasn't allowed to talk about at the time, but now what are they going to do? Translated that into college, had an SEO business in college, and was involved in student government, was the president of my college, and then started an agency in college, and then that turned into an agency right after college, which eventually turned into Marpipe. So I think that was over 60 seconds, but that's the kind of too long didn't read version.
That's a great story. Yeah, it brings up one of the questions people often ask about, like, are entrepreneurs made or born?
Mm-hmm.
First reaction, just thinking about your life, what would you say?
Man, this is such a bad answer, but it's a mix of both. Like, no one wants to hear that answer. It's so like equivocating, but yeah, I think that you need to be. Some people are born with it, but you're born with something that needs to be developed, right, and encouraged, right? If my parents discouraged, like entrepreneurial endeavors, it would. I might be a lawyer or a doctor today. But they really encouraged it. And so that kind of nurturing environment for that was important. But man, really, one thing I'll tell you, Andy, is I think it probably, if I was to give you one, if it's like you can only pick one, I'd say born, because man, like the people that I know that I'm friends with that are like really successful entrepreneurs today, um, they were born hustlers. They've been doing it since day one. They were moving and shaking things from like when they were kids. So I think I see that trend more often.
And I think I hear that trend looking at you, because it's not like you waited till you were out of college and in your 20s to start doing anything. I think I only counted 3 or 4 businesses before you graduated from college.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. I guess it's born then.
Dan, I know first you'd founded and built Marlboro's speech and debate team, and then I knew at Binghamton you created a major for yourself and you launched a nonprofit for underprivileged scholars. But did I hear you say you also were president, like of the whole school?
I was president of the college, the residential college, Mountain View College, and then the student government was called the Student Association, of which I was chief of staff, which is second to the president of the entire university, the student president. So, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
we gathered together 5 of your buddies who know the good, the bad, the ugly. And we say to them, you got 3 seconds, shout out 2 or 3 words which capture your buddy Dan. What do we hear them say?
Oh, loud, persistent, unyielding, and maybe like bashful. Yeah, those are I'm just saying the things that come to mind, and those aren't always good things. Like those things can be conflated with stubbornness. So and that's not a good thing. So, but yeah, those are the things that come to mind. What do you think?
Well, I bashful would never have ent. I don't think I'm going to look up in the dictionary and see a picture of Dan Pantelo next to the word bashful.
Well, you only know me in our irrelevant context as investor and CEO, of your portfolio company. But my friends know me in a professional and a social context. Which is a slightly different frame, right? I think, yeah.
Well, you said, what do you think? I mean, Randy may have a different point of view, but when I think of you, I think of relentless. I think of restless. I think of eternally optimistic. I think of you as a guy who runs towards the danger, which is an important thing for an entrepreneur. And I'm looking forward to seeing the bashful side.
Well, it's been since we haven't really hung out much. So let's get that going. But I think that one thing that you think that's interesting, one thing you mentioned that is, I think, worth spending a moment on is like the optimism side, right? I think that almost like a naive optimism is so important to like being able to make it through the ups and the downs of this journey. I'd say like naive optimism, like specifically underlining the word naive, because when I look at ideas, I'm always like, most people think about what are all the reasons this wouldn't work when they hear about ideas, but I focus almost exclusively on all the reasons why it would work. Which I think when you think through that lens, it's more likely that the things that you work on will end up being successful. That it's like an infectious optimism that where the folks who are working on this problem with you are have high conviction because they can see like a vivid picture drawn of a positive outcome. So that has been like a really important, I think, trait. I think the most important trait to have, actually.
Randy, I don't want to monopolize.
Well,
You know I will.
what we didn't talk, the trait that we haven't really leaned into is I think you're a natural born salesman. And I think that relates to optimism. I think it relates to being persistent, sometimes loud, sometimes bashful. But I think that you are really good at one, selling something with conviction, but also understanding who you're selling to and getting into their head and seeing what buttons to press, or at least try. And I think, to my understanding, you were a street salesman in New York City, in low-income neighborhoods selling electronics on street corners. And then your eyes were kind of opened to the notion of MarTech. And, the rest, as they say, is history. Were you a natural salesman, or did MarTech make you a salesman? Was there an aha moment there? I'm really curious.
Yeah, sales to me is has so little to do with convincing people to buy things, with actually like the act of selling, and in my mind, so much more to do with like processes and like consumer behavior, which I think once you can understand consumer behavior and what are the processes to like steer and guide it, is just the most like powerful combination of skills, right? And that's what's really interesting to me: the power that you can that is yieldable by somebody who understands those things really well. The influence you can have on manipulating the world around you and the circumstances you're in once you're able to master those two things. And I think that part of that, a lot of successful people I know that also have this kind of relentless quality have had some experience in field sales or some role where your job was to have people say no to you significantly more than they said yes to you, right? Like I think getting a lot of no's and a lot of doors like slammed in your face is like a really important formative experience that everybody should go through at some point in their life. That was really important. Like, I don't know that I would survive the fundraising process if I hadn't had that experience earlier, right? I had, over 100 investors say no before we had a few say yes, but it was just about persevering through that. And I knew that it was a numbers game, and that's what like sales, street sales teaches you, right? Like it's a numbers game. It's a process you can't get emotional about when people say no to you. And eventually you just have to dig through the no's to get to the yeses. I don't think that like anybody is a natural, like, I think that if people can naturally have an understanding of consumer behavior. Sales is two parts. It's like consumer behavior and then like processes. Consumer behavior, I think some people are natural at being convincing and swaying others and just, being very emotive and guiding human emotion. I think what people aren't born with, which you need to be taught, is the processes, right? Like here's a system for how to do that at scale. So that wasn't natural to me. I had to figure that out and learn that the hard way. I hated going through that process. It was painful. It was tough. It was like boot camp. But looking back, I'm so glad that I did it. And I would think that everyone else should do it too. And then that, like, the thing is, MarTech is like processes for influencing consumer behavior at the absolute highest level, right? It's like that on like complete steroids, right? Like how can we actually build software and technology and systems that enable people to do this, not just across as many people as you can talk to on a street corner, but across billions of impressions on the internet every day, right? And that's like the highest possible scale of it, which makes me naturally drawn to it.
And Dan, you've used a number of times the word natural, things that we naturally have, or gifts, skills. And you've been doing this for a while. For a young guy, been starting businesses, springboarding, I think, or leveraging a lot of those skills. What one skill, if you could wave a wand over Dan Pantelo, we'll call it a natural thing, would you want to add to your repertoire? And I'm not talking about, I'd like to learn finance, I'd like to learn physics, but something more intrinsic to you as a person, something you don't have that you'd like.
And oh man, that really forces you to reflect, right? Um, I would say that um, I would say that it's I'd I'd like I'd like to have more discipline and self control. Um, I think that in my life, I I admire people who stick to a very to a strict routine. I think that's so important. I think you can actually find freedom in strict adherence to self discipline, right? Wake up every day at this time, meditate, do the workout, right? Have the healthy breakfast, drink a cup of coffee and get to work. Take a break at this time, right? I think that my life could benefit significantly from that sort of discipline. I really admire others. When I see other entrepreneurs who have it, I'm like, man, these guys are operating on one level above me. And if I could just, and I know why, and I know that if I could just have that, I could get to that next level and have that breakthrough. And that's something I think I'm working on right
We have to introduce you to a guy named Wills Hapworth.
now.
Dan, one thing I would share is that for so many years I thought similarly, and I thought, as soon as I'm not starting this up and I get through this phase, as soon as things slow down, I'll flip the switch and I'll get more discipline in my day and routine. And it's actually the exact inverse. Start immediately and start getting more discipline in your routine, and watch how quickly things slow down.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. That is what I think. I think I don't have time for discipline now, right? Like let's do it later. Let's save it for later. I'll have time for discipline later. No, that's so you're right. It's wrong to think that way. Yeah, it has to be done now, immediately. And yeah, that's so I think that's an important trait that I wouldn't say that I'm strong in. And I could be better there.
So Dan, we just talked about what you would add. If you're like most of us humans, there's elements of you as a person that you wish you could kind of either lessen, remove, extract. Well, what's a piece of Dan Pantelo that it's part of me, but I kind of wish it wasn't?
Yeah, this one's easy. This one's much easier than the previous question, and I think it's like an internal ego, right? I I would like to have less ego. I know it's important and it's a driver. It's something that I think is it makes me it's a big part of what makes me who I am. Um, but I don't like the idea that once I hit major milestones and accomplishments in my life, I don't like the idea that I feel accomplished and feel like I can relax a little bit. It's this it creeps up. It's like, oh, I did it, I made it, I checked this check mark. Let me let's I made it, right? And no, I didn't make it. I'm not shit right now. Like I am not, I haven't even scratched the surface of what I want to do. And I think that me feeling like I have I have already done these big things, it's like it's a force that works against me, right? I'd like that feeling to just get out of the way, so that I can keep going without any distractions. It feels distracting to have this sense of ego that tells you, hey, relax, chill out, you did it. Like compare yourself to your peer group. Like, no, that's an irrelevant thought that shouldn't be present.
I'm smiling because we often say the flip side of a virtue is a vice. And people are often saying, hey, put your feet up for a minute and smell the roses. But I hear you saying, the key is put your feet up, smell the roses, but don't let it go on for more than a minute and then get back.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's true that accomplishment takes away hunger, right? And I want to stay hungry. I like being hungry. I operate best when I'm hungry. It's most fulfilling to be that way. And having a feast on the table is distracting.
You remind me of one other saying. My father used to always say, leave the table a little bit hungry and you'll keep moving forward.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. That's right.
So Dan, if our egos can distract us, what rattles you? You know, because those are different things, and distractions. It's good to know. It's good to conquer both. I will not allow myself to be distracted more than an attaboy I'll give myself when I accomplish something. But what throws you off your game, and what are you doing to attack that?
What throws me off my game? Well, when I think that big, when we go through this journey of entrepreneurship, there are big swings up and big swings down, right? And I think that the best entrepreneurs remain completely level-headed and cool-minded and emotionally in the same state, no matter which extreme of that ride you're on. Like when you're going through an extremely good moment, you're not ecstatic and enthused and partying hard. And when you're going through a terrible moment, you're not, and the business is suffering, you're not like, wallowing in misery. You're cool and level-headed throughout the entire journey, right? You're like a rock that creates that stability in such a volatile world. I think that today I am more rattled than I should be by the extreme ups and downs. When we have a down quarter where a retention issue pops up and then there's employee turnover, right? I let it affect my emotional state more than I should. I know logically, rationally, that we know exactly how to solve this problem. There's a playbook for it, and we're going to put our heads down and do it, right? I just wish it didn't impact me emotionally as it does. I have the same is true for the upside moments. I'm too happy. I'm too let my guard down a little bit too much and take my kind of foot off the gas a little bit. I shouldn't do that. The best entrepreneurs don't. And so that's something that is like the emotional extremes of the roller coaster are rattling to, I think, less experienced entrepreneurs. And I think that with experience, with time, as you see this ride and those extremes and peaks and valleys over and over again, you become much more seasoned, and it hardens you over time.
It's interesting hearing that, because I won't speak for Randy on this one, but you must keep that inside of you, because as somebody who's, we've known you for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, speak to you, monthly at least. I can't say I ever actually see that going on. You seem like a very level kind of guy. But again, who knows what lurks beneath the surface?
Well, you can't let your emotions get manifest when you speak to your investors, right? I mean, this isn't, we're not here. Your guys aren't my therapists. And if I treated you as such, we'd have a significantly different relationship than what we have today. So, my job I have an obligation. I think I have an obligation and a duty from folks that believe in us in the early days and who we take capital from, which is that, my obligation to you is to report to you the kind of unfiltered, objective truth of what's happening in the business. If I leaned into you as my, therapist, advisory is different than emotional therapy, right? And so I work with, for instance, today I work with a group. I'm in a group of CEOs, other venture-backed CEOs, through an organization that puts us in a pod, and we're able to commiserate with each other and vent and share stories. And certainly, everyone is able to really that's something like an outlet that is really useful for me. But of course, our relationship, is different for a good reason.
And if we were your therapist, you'd be sending us checks.
That's right.
So I don't have an elegant way of asking this, but you're obviously a smart, talented guy. you had a nice agency running, you can get a job doing all sorts of stuff. But you put yourself into this cauldron of, pressure coming from all sorts of directions, where success is anything but guaranteed and failure tends to happen more often than success. Why? Like what drives you, motivates you? Why the hell are you doing this?
Yeah. I'm not concerned about like safety as far as survival, right? Like I know I'll be fine. Like I know that if it all breaks tomorrow and you guys take Marpipe away from me tomorrow and it's all like the lights turn off in the office, I know I'll be fine, right? I also know that I'm a terrible employee. I don't think that, I should be working for someone else. I think they'll hire much better people than me. I'll go work on my next things. But the idea, Andy, is just where we live. I think we live in a society where taking big risks and making big swings is rewarded. And I think in a world where you have the capacity to do that, you probably shouldn't be doing anything else, right? Like, why would I play it safe in a world where I can not play it safe and have access to the big win, like have access to big wins, right? You are gonna later in life look back and regret not rolling those dice at every opportunity. And so like I think I'm risk. I say I'm very risk tolerant in how I guess like spend my time, generally speaking. But then I'm risk averse in like the kind of day-to-day management of the company, right? Like we're not going to fail. This is going to work. Really, I don't think that like, I don't feel like I know that objectively doing what we're doing, Marpipe, like by the numbers, is more likely to fail than to succeed because of the nature of venture. But I don't feel like that at all. I don't feel like this is a risk. In terms of like on a day to day when I go to work, I don't like. I'm extremely. I'm confident that what we're building here is going to succeed. And so it doesn't feel like I'm living on the edge of disaster every day. I feel quite secure on a day to day basis.
Dan, we've now segued to talking about Marpipe, but we kind of skipped the opportunity to let you give the elevator. What is Marpipe?
Yeah, great call. So what are we doing here? Marpipe automates the process of creative testing for brands and agencies. We all know that the ad creative, what the ad visually looks like, is the most influential factor to the performance of ads in general. And so the best way to get the best ad creative is to do the most amount of testing. We know that as well. But the actual process of testing ad creative is the most time consuming and hardest to execute for brands. When it comes for creatives and marketers, when it comes to creative testing, there is, the actual process of making the creative, the deployment of it, and then the analysis and extracting all the insights you possibly can from it. This is one of those products where people say, how does this not exist already? We were looking for that when we were running an agency for a platform that automates all of those pieces of the process, and we found none, so we decided to build it ourselves. And so today we work with some of the largest advertisers on paid social today to make sure that they're able to out-test and out-learn their competition. And as a result, they have the best ad creative.
What's it like? You were running an agency before.
Yeah.
Which isn't business. It's a startup. You shift to running a SaaS business. Smooth, easy, basically the same thing, profoundly different. Like, what was that transition like? Is it just, we had chocolate, now we have vanilla, or we had chocolate and now we have a, steaming pepperoni pizza?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a totally different ballpark. It's significantly better. um, SaaS, SaaS is a way better business model, and I was very attracted to running a business that operated on a recurring revenue business model than I was a services industry. So agencies are actually like a terrible business. And I think it takes it's I think it's really I don't like that business category. I've learned it. I've learned that I don't like it by doing it. Um, I wouldn't start another one personally. It's not for me. It's for some people, and for those people who do it really well, I have a tremendous amount of respect because I think it's very difficult. The kind of turnover and churn. On average, an agency holds on to a client for 1 year, right? So the turnover and the churn is it's crazy. It's all a people business. So the turnover in people is very high in that world. And when one person leaves, business typically goes with that person. And you spend a most amount of your time trying to retain people, but you can't really retain them that well with money because agencies also have bad margins. And so all of you have good revenues, but you have extremely high costs. And the more you pay your people, if you try to pay better than market, you're destroying your margins. And so that's why we actually were like, let's take all the profit from the agency and invest it into building technologies that can give us recurring revenue streams, because we all rapidly wanted to get away from that sort of volatile model. And that makes me understand exactly why, an agency, like a SaaS business generating $1 million in recurring revenue, is way more valuable as a business than an agency generating 10 million bucks a year, right? Because the recurring revenue and the automation and the processes that's not dependent on people makes the multiple on that revenue significantly more attractive.
Dan, let me wrestle with you a little bit here. You just talked about, the difference between the two business models.
Yeah.
Potential difference between the values of the business. But I want to focus on something else, and that's building and running a service business versus a SaaS business. And you've got the experience of both. Is it essentially the same thing? Just, we're using different ingredients, or is one profoundly easier, harder, more challenging, more vexing, problems that are unclear how to solve? Can you talk about running the business?
Yeah, I think that running and building an agency business is better for people who want to deal with people all day, and building and running a SaaS business is better for people who are more mechanical and technical thinkers that want to build systems rather than interact with people.
Okay,
right?
I've got to jump in, and I should never apologize in a podcast. This is very heady and intellectual. What I want to know is, as a guy who's done both,
Yeah,
you've lived both experientially. What is there any real difference? It's just, hey, I ran this kind of business. They're both businesses, same kind of thing. Is one, very different in terms of the experience, the challenge, the nature of the problems? What's it feel like, the difference between the two? If it's not.
It feels really different because to run a successful agency, you have to be coaching people and training people and making people perfect, which is very fulfilling. Which is fulfilling, right? It's something that, like, it feels good to bring someone in and train them up and make them an expert in their field. And, that's the agency business, right? You're making people professional consultants. It feels rewarding in the way that you feel rewarded when you're coaching someone and they have a big win, right? That's a good feeling. A lot of people really value that, right? A SaaS business is a totally different animal. It is pizza to ice cream, not vanilla to chocolate. It is, what it feels like to build a SaaS business is the feeling of fulfillment and reward you get from like assembling, like finishing assembling, like, a puzzle or, like a piece of furniture, that like rewarding feeling after you've like built a thing with your hands. Right. It's a totally different type of rewarding. It's a totally different type of fulfillment. That's how I describe like the actual emotional feeling of reward. And which one is better for which one do you like more? And, is kind of like can actually, I think, determine which kind of business could be better for you.
We run, so you ran a service business before, you're building a SaaS business now. We often run into similar situations where a founder has run a service business and sat back and said, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could automate this? But in our experience, it's a lot easier to say than to do. What's been the challenge for you of crossing that chasm?
Yeah, it was the challenge, the biggest challenge of my professional career, by like the biggest challenge of my career so far, by a country mile. We In order to automate something and in order to build good software, oh my God, it has ideas don't like some people think they're gonna build a great business because they have a good idea. Everybody has good ideas. That's not nearly enough. It's all in the execution. And even if you have a bad idea, but you're a great executor, you'll still beat the person with a good idea and bad execution, right? And when it comes to execution and building a SaaS company, in order to build software that users want to use, it's very complex, right? And there's so many different pieces that you need to like get right? You need to build, when it comes to the different like teams and competencies that your company needs to get right. There's no way like one person could be a specialist in all of those things, right? You need to bring in like a team of specialists that are good at their individual things and all know and you need to kind of play the orchestra and make sure that they all play the perfect symphony together. And so like it felt like I went from being someone who was like good at playing the drums to being a symphony conductor, right? It's a different skill set. It's a big leap. So that's how I describe it from a high level.
I love it. Dan, you inferred that apparently some of your clients don't want you to discuss that they work with Marpipe.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? And I'm curious, do you think it's so that they don't give up their competitive advantage? Is there some sort of stigma you think perhaps associated with getting help in this regard? Or am I totally off base? It's something else altogether?
Yeah. So the type of reaction we get from some of our best users when they see a demo of how our platform works is, oh my God, this is our secret weapon. Right. When it comes to like innovating and like, what's the future? Usually like the future already exists. It's just a small amount of people who live in it. Like somewhere out there, there's a community of like people who are only drinking Soylent and that's all they consume all day, every day. And there's like, there's actually a group of like 10,000 of us and we think this is the future. Right. And there's just 10,000 of them in some subreddit somewhere as a community. Right. Like the future exists in pockets. It just hasn't conflagrated across all of society yet and become part of the mainstream. Like there's already people living in the future. I think that when some people discover something that is a competitive advantage that like significant enough to they want to protect it against like, their peers in the industry. And, we're under very explicit, instruction from some of our customers that we cannot share their logos and cannot work with, their competitors. And I think that indicates the innovative nature of the product that we have and the difference that it makes for these teams.
I love this as a macro concept. I mean, we could probably spend an hour podcast just talking about someone's living the future, and eventually we all will on so many levels. But as a marketer myself, it feels like that means that, basically in its simplest form, your job is to have other brand marketers realize that this is the future. Folks are already living it. How soon until you're living it yourself? This and it's really just a matter of that. It's almost, there's an assumptive nature to it that can't be communicated in that way, but that's the reality. It's to step into the future and do this, or you're going to be living in the past.
That's like when we demo Marpipe, we have one of two reactions. It's very binary. People fall into one of two buckets. We already know this to expect this. When we show the type of technology that we have, when we're introducing data science and automation into the creative process, right? Group number one of people will say, hey, this is unnatural. You guys are freaks. This is not how it's always been done. Keep your data and your automation out of my creative process. Group number two of people is like, I'm willing to try anything for an advantage. So I'm going to give it a spin. And if it works, it works. I'm going to follow like the data. And so we obviously, group number two is like the people that we sell to. And there is enough of them for us to have the growth that we're seeing 100% inbound. And it's, through like mostly like either inbound leads, referral, or organic, are our main channels today. So it kind of speaks to itself among the group of early adopters and innovators. When we talk to category number one, I don't try to convince them that this is the future. I think that's like futile. Like, why am I going to spend my time trying to convince people who are like, that what we have is innovative? Like, I'd much rather spend my time talking to the innovators, and then eventually group number one will either adapt or die. They'll either come back to you or become obsolete and irrelevant. And so I'd rather have them come to me in the future and spend my time working on the people who want to be innovative than spend my time trying to convince them.
I love that. You'll either adapt or die. If you don't want to die, use Marpipe.
I think so. I think your creative and marketing teams, if you're spending over $100K a month on ads, on advertising, your creative or marketing teams should be at least aware of what we're doing and have an opinion on it.
One more question springboarding off of that idea of the future's already here. It's just that there's a small number of people living there. The people who are living in the future, I'm imagining, I don't want to put words in your mouth, are the ones who are most receptive to Marpipe. Is that fair?
Yes.
Who are those people? They found functionally, they reside at a certain part of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll tell you exactly. So, and I think that, like great entrepreneurs ride big waves that would be there with or without them. It's just about being at the right place at the right time to catch the wave. It often matters so less on like what you're building specifically, and so much more about which area you're building in, right? So what we see is this is something I can tell you that is happening, that is going to happen in the future. This is a massive wave that has just started and is about to continue for a very long time. It's a force in the industry, which is the creatives, people who make ads. They in the future will look a lot more like scientists and engineers than like traditional artists. Historically, they look like traditional artist types, right? The profile of who these people are is changing in this decade. And at the end of this decade will be totally different than what it was at the beginning of this one. That is a tidal wave change happening right now. That is a wave we're going to ride, right? The creatives are becoming significantly more performance driven. Creatives used to never care about performance. They used to be divorced from it entirely. It was a different department from media buyers. Now, the influence that media buyers have on performance is waning, and the influence that creatives have on performance has never been higher and is continuing to increase. And so the creatives who care about performance and understand how to manipulate market data have a huge advantage against all the other like just start learning about marketing data as a creative. Boom, you're 0.1 top percent of your field, most desirable to hire. Very easy way to differentiate yourself. It's like all of it, all like it's like oil and water, right? Like that's a different breed that is small right now and growing really quickly because of how powerful and influential it can be. I think the salaries that creatives get paid is going to be performance driven. They'll like salespeople and marketers are paid on performance. Creatives will be too, right? And so we're building the tooling and infrastructure for that new breed of creatives who are performance driven. And you know, they'll be using tooling like Marpipe as the kind of picks and shovels to do their job.
You paint a very interesting picture of the future when you're talking about creatives more like scientists. You know, today we think most of us who've been in ad agencies think of creatives primarily garbed in black. You're painting a picture of creatives with pocket protectors.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's a fascinating way to think about the future and creativity.
That's right. Yeah.
Randy?
So, but let's clarify it a drop further. So there's, I guess, 3 buckets. You're talking about how the media buyers are becoming far less influential and the creatives are more, you know, becoming much more prominent and comped accordingly. And then and that creatives are becoming, you know, data analysts. But let's consider that a 3rd bucket for now. And let's say that, you know, elevated are the creatives who are making the ads and then the analysts who are looking at the numbers and circling back to the creatives. These are different people, you know, inherently, at least currently in the organization, and they tend not to hang in the same sandboxes. You know, how is Marpipe getting them to communicate and play nice together?
Yeah. So in order for creatives to make actionable sense of marketing data and like ad performance data, it needs to be a different type of data. Like today, creatives can't look at the result of an A/B test, which is the best that we have today, manually. People are running A/B tests today. When you show people, you know, a Starbucks cup and a red Solo cup, and you ask someone, which do you prefer, right? Like, which of these do you prefer? That's an A/B test. They'll pick one. If someone picks a Starbucks cup over the red Solo cup as their preferred receptacle of liquid, right? You can make some conclusions about what they're probably like, but you can't quantify like exactly what made them pick it, right? Like maybe they like white more than they like red as a color. Maybe they like a paper over plastic. Maybe they like to drink. Maybe they just love coffee over beer, whatever it might be, right? If you can drill into exactly why, then like you can build a profile about what to make next for these people. And A/B testing doesn't tell you; it just tells you which one, but not why. Multivariate testing is when you hold the variables constant. So for instance, in this example, if I showed you a red Solo cup and a blue Solo cup, they are identical, except the only difference is the color. When you pick one, I have learned something very specific about your visual preference. I know what color you prefer. I know exactly why you chose it because I've controlled for the other variables. So now I know Randy likes blue way more than he likes red, right? And so as a creative, this gives me very specific instruction on what kind of things to build next for you, right? And so as we gather, so the type of data is actually like the biggest gap. The type of data that's presented to creatives is their biggest gap, preventing them from being able to like really use it today and play in the same sandbox. If you're able to show them insights that they can react to immediately and use to influence what they build next, such that they know what they're building will perform better, then suddenly they play a lot nicer, and the sandbox becomes friendly for both kids to play in.
Dan, being an entrepreneur is a journey. And we often say, the path of an entrepreneur is strewn with problems, obstacles, unfinished bridges, flooded rivers, etc. And what that means is along that journey, you're making one decision after another. And often decisions under conditions of uncertainty, decisions about which way to go when no one's actually gone left or right before. Or to quote Captain James T. Kirk, boldly going where no man or woman has gone before. As you've been on this journey, is there one decision that you wish you could have a chance to make again, remake, take back? And what would it be and why?
Your question assumes that I would want to undo previous failures, of which there were many. But I wouldn't want to trying to not fail is a really bad mentality, I think. I think that embracing failure is important. I wouldn't undo any mistakes because it would make me slightly different and worse than what I am today. The mistakes make you better. You learn from them. You should embrace them. People who are scared of failure shouldn't be entrepreneurs, right? Those who embrace it and can make a ton of mistakes and just hope that the one thing that goes right out of the 10 that go wrong is enough to make up for the 10 that went wrong. Like that's I guess the ethos, right? So it's like, I know I'm going to be making mistakes all the time. That makes me better and makes me making less mistakes over time. So I wouldn't undo any of my previous mistakes.
Okay, I'm gonna have to wrestle with you here.
Yeah,
because we're all over the idea of you got to be able to deal with failure, etc. But I have never ever in my life met an entrepreneur, or frankly a person, who hasn't said something like, I wish I had done more of this, less of this, done this quicker, maybe thought twice about doing this other thing.
I can tell you the mistakes I've made, right? I think I just needed to make them to learn from them, right? But I absolutely, like, we can look back and say, like, here are all the things that we shouldn't have done, that are mistakes, we shouldn't have made, for sure. Like, the biggest one that comes to mind, I think, is like hiring and firing decisions, right? Like, there's some people who I wish I hired significantly sooner, and some people that I wish I fired significantly sooner. Those are the worst ones. Those are like, the biggest, I think, most influential ones. But to say, like, if I hadn't, if I hadn't made those mistakes, now I've learned from it, and I'm much better on that, I think.
Sure. Let me flip it and say, if you walked into a room and there were a bunch of young Dan Pantelos, as opposed to the elderly guy we're talking to here, but younger Dan Pantelos, who are starting on the journey or maybe partway down the journey, and you were going to give them a little bit of advice based on the mistakes, based on maybe some of the good moves you made, some of the moves, should have done something a little different here. What I just want to springboard off of, you should have, it sounded like the hiring one's a fascinating one, because we always say, a one man or one woman band doesn't make much music. The founder doesn't execute, the team executes. So you mentioned hiring somebody earlier, firing somebody earlier. What's the macro learning you would share with other entrepreneurs who are starting down the path?
Yeah, it's all about people in your crew. It's all about like people think that because we're automating things that the people themselves are like replaceable. You know, in a in a services business, it's all about the people. But weirdly enough, this actually circles back to, I think maybe we can extract a macro learning from something we discussed earlier. Um, Even in SaaS businesses, it's all about the people because you're building processes. Processes are built by people. You can't automate the people out of the business. You can't SaaSify your way away from being dependent on those lieutenants that are the specialists at their role and their job, right? And you have to have a healthy relationship with your dependency on these people, and there, it's a mutual dependency. I
Look, Dan,
think that,
I got to interrupt here. And they push back. They go, Dan,
yeah,
listen, of course, it's all about the people. But what lesson do you have for me as a guy who's starting out building my team based on what you've learned?
yeah. The lesson is that the lesson I would give to others is, I think that if you're a leader, you should have, grow your kind of army of lieutenants that are the people that you're going to take with you no matter where you go in the future, that are just like your people that'll follow you, whether it's Marpipe, whether it's something different, right? And I wish I had started thinking like that a lot earlier, right? There's the things that I thought previously were antiquated to the software world, like loyalty, just like being able to just really share a drink and get along with someone really well. Kind of crossing that professional boundary like just a little bit so that it's more personal. I wish I had started embracing that a lot earlier than I did, because now that I have, and kind of really, it's like when it comes to work-life balance, my life is my work, my work is my life is how I think of it. It's like my life's work, right? People who share that mentality, and are able to like break through that. And so it's not just like these kind of professional barriers where we're living two different lives, but it's just the one same life and we're in it together for the long run. And I know I can always depend on you for X, Y, Z, and I know you're going to crush it there. Like, wow, like you're building your army, you're building your people, your team. That's real team building right there. I wish I had embraced that earlier rather than thinking of people in this kind of segmented fractional capacity. That's the best way I can explain it. I hope it makes sense.
No, that's super helpful.
Dan, this has been awesome, and we really appreciate your time. If we may, let me hit you with one final question.
Yeah.
I want to say when you get Marpipe right, what is the big vision you have created? What is the future that Marpipe is creating for the industry?
Yeah. When it comes to, we will see when Marpipe automates creative testing across the majority of teams in the industry who put money behind ad creative. We will see a world of confidence and certainty behind creative decision making. There's going to be no more guesswork involved in the process of like making good creative that works well. And that I see as a major historic milestone in the trajectory of the creative industry as a whole. It is too mired down in people's opinions and arbitrary taste making, and we now have the technology to bring it into a place of much more confidence and more certainty using the power of data and automation. And so that'll create a different way that creative works across the industry as a whole. And we hope to be like good stewards and accelerators of that transformation.
And Dan, it's interesting. I know this was our final question, but I'll throw in one more because you paint a really interesting picture. A world now where, it's sort of like I made the ad, I love it. My, CMO loves it. We'll put it out there. Maybe it works, it doesn't. You say there's going to be a lot more confidence around creative. So what does the world end up looking like? I wish I had an elegant way of asking this. When all the creative out there is relevant and on target and persuasive and compelling, like, is everybody just buying a lot more stuff? What's the world look like then?
Yeah, it is. It's actually, it's kind of scary to think about, because it's so powerful. Because it's so effective, it's so efficient. But I live in a capitalist society, not a communist society, going back to kind of the root paradigm from which I was raised. And the job of a capitalist society is to accelerate the efficiency of a consumer culture, of a culture of consumption, right? And so if we can match you with the goods and services that are best for you in the most efficient way possible, your consumption is going to go up, as it should, which is a healthy manifestation of a capitalist society. What implications it has elsewhere on the economy are a whole podcast that we could have, talking about the social implications of it and the political implications of it. But yes, I mean, efficiency is going to go up, and it is going to be a very powerful technology that should be regulated, ideally. I just hope that our regulatory bodies will be in a competent place enough to understand it well enough and keep up with it well enough to be able to regulate it efficiency, because it's a good tool, but we all know that, weapons can be used by the bad guys or the good guys. Right. And so let's make sure it's not used by the bad guys for bad things.
Well, that's a big, important, and optimistic note to end on, and to quote the old saying, from your lips to God's ear. Really, really, Dan, appreciate your time, your creativity. And there's at least 7 or 8 awesome sayings in there that we're going to extract. We'll call them Panteloisms.
This was a lot of fun. And what I really appreciate, what I love about this interview is you're drilling in. You don't let me get away with the easy answer. You have to drill a little bit deeper until you get the real substance out. I love that about you guys. It's always how our conversations go. So this was really fun.
Trained researchers, we know that it's the why behind the what. Kind of Marpipe-esque.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, hey, thanks again for your time, man. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining us for our interview with Dan Pantelo, founder and CEO of Marpipe, a company that is revolutionizing the way online marketers develop and optimize their advertising. During this interview, Dan touched on a variety of fascinating topics, including the future already being here, except that there are just a few people living in it, why Marpipe's customers don't want their competitors to know they're using Marpipe, the difference between building a managed service business and a software as a service business, and finally, he painted a picture of a world where creatives will also be part scientists. We invite you to join us for the next episode of It's the People, where we will be talking with Matthew Glick, founder and CEO of Gipper. Gipper is building the dominant graphics creation platform for sub-professional sports. In the meantime, this is Andy Greenfield of TIA Ventures, a seed stage fund that invests in early stage B2B software companies that have achieved visceral product market fit, have teams that are ready for prime time, and have customers who cannot live without the company's product. Thank you again for your time.